as the pre-Descemet's layer, or coming at it the other way, the pre-Descemet's layer continues as the beams of the trabecular meshwork. So that's seen in the inset picture in a little more detail. You see the dark layer there is the pre-Descemet's layer opening into the trabecular meshwork. But if you look on the right side, this is a scanning electron micrograph of the posterior surface of Dua's layer from which the Descemet's has been removed. And you can see how imperceptibly it carries on as the beams of the trabecular meshwork. So it is one layer. There is no two ways about that. And this is a high power scanning EM to show you exactly the same, how what you're seeing is the posterior surface of Dua's layer and the trabecular beams and those little holes which we see as the transition begins from one to the other, from where air might escape into the anterior chamber during DALC. Now, all of you can understand this better if I just show you this little scarf. So you imagine the scarf knit with wool and lots of strands, and those strands are then let loose as the tassels at the end. So the tassels are the trabecular meshwork with the pores, and that scarf is the pre-Descemet's layer. And if you imagine the red and the velvet underneath is all the Descemet's membrane. Now keep that in mind as we go to this picture of deep sclerectomy. And these are my glaucoma colleagues who performed this operation. And this is from some of these, all these images from the web. So you cut a deep block of sclera to expose the Descemet's membrane. Now, people who have read about the layer and know about the layer have actually made a distinction. You can actually expose the pre-Descemet's layer and leave it behind, or you can actually excise the pre-Descemet's layer and leave only Descemet's membrane behind. And that can happen because there's a clear plane of cleavage between both the posterior stroma and the pre-Descemet's layer, and the pre-Descemet's layer and the Descemet's membrane. Now, this work is done by Dr. Harshvardhan Ghorpade and his colleague Morekar from Bombay. And they've shown that when you do deep sclerectomy operation, it works best if the Dua's layer is also excised. If it is not excised, then the operation is not that successful. And they went on to show in patients by doing live video fluoroscopy with trypan blue dye that greater oozing of the dye mixing with the aqueous happens when you have taken away the pre-Descemet's layer rather than when you left it behind. And it clinically corresponded with the patients where the success rate was better when the Dua's layer was removed than when it was not removed. So apart from it being impervious to air, which we have seen and all the time in our operations, it is also offering greater resistance to the flow of aqueous than the Descemet's membrane alone, and hence in deep sclerectomy, it should be removed. So these are the posters they have presented and the paper is being written up. So if you go back to that example of the pre-Descemet's layer, then you have to excise that pre-Descemet's layer to expose the velvet underneath, which is the Descemet's membrane in the window that we create in deep sclerectomy. So that's the relevance, very tangible evidence now coming through on how this might influence this particular type of glaucoma surgery. So again, we can pause here and take some questions. Then we will go on to the next part, I think, where we will answer the questions that were just posed. I'm trying to open this. Let's see if we can. Yes, by the questions posed by Kamran. So any questions on this part of the clinical application?
A new surprise also.
Yes.
How the participation of the pre-Descemet's layer in, if you succeed to remove it, you will succeed to have a better non-filtering surgery, and it's amazing, and does explain how many cases have failed in deep sclerectomy.
Yeah, so if you leave that, or sometimes if you don't go deep enough and leave the pre-Descemet's layer and some stroma. Now, the gentleman has done scanning EMs, and we are doing more work with him and with others to prove this in eye bank eyes and by other means. So we have in vivo and in vitro evidence, which is quite exciting going forward in this area of research. So let's move on to the next one now. I was telling you, which is where we will find, because the next two are linked. So here we are. So we know that